Good morning and afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our Leaders in Housing Counseling webinar. We welcome you to our first webinar for the year and our first webinar on our new Zoom platform. We will be hosting our webinars on Zoom going forward. Just a couple of housekeeping rules before we get started. The first one is if you need to enable closed captioning, if you toggle your mouse towards the bottom of your screen and click the live transcription box, live transcription will show up at the bottom of your screen. All questions, if you have any questions, we have two moments within this webinar where you can ask any question that you may have for our panelists. You can put your question in the Q&A box, which is also located at the bottom of your screen. A copy of today's presentation has also been added to the chat box. If you scroll up, you can download a PDF copy of this presentation. So thank you again for joining us, and we're going to turn it over to Bruce to go over our agenda for the day. Thank you again, and enjoy our webinar.
Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to 2022. You know, this is really an important time in our work. You all have done a tremendous amount of work over the past few years to really build the capacity and the influence of housing counseling. We're a much stronger community and industry than we used to be, and in many ways a much more skilled one. I think this is a lot of very good times for our work. Obviously, we've got more than a few challenges out there as well, and we want to both acknowledge them and elevate the successes and the wins. What we wanted to do today is normally we would start out with updates, especially legislative updates and action items. We've got a number of our partners and allies who are experts in this who are going to give us their perspective on many of these issues, and we'll have an opportunity to touch base in the greater agenda to be able to really do a deeper dive on some of this. And what we want to do is really just focus on what our plans are for 2022 and the kinds of things we're working on. We're also very interested in hearing from you about what we should be doing. And we're also talking about some ways of developing input sessions, I'll call them counselor forums, that will give you an opportunity to elevate things you're seeing in the field that might inform the kind of policy work we do and help us shape the agenda going forward. So in a lot of ways, you know, we're doing good work, but it's also your organization, and we really appreciate the deep input that everybody has done in building this work. So big thanks to all that. But we're going to dive right into the agenda. We expect this call to be about an hour and a half. As Ebony just said, there'll be two opportunities for Q&A. So put your Q&A in the put your questions in the Q&A box, and when you do them, when you think of them, and we'll have a couple breaks where we can dive into these issues. But let's dive into the agenda first, and we're welcoming a new staff member. We're very excited about that. Ellie's going to bring us up to date on community outreach issues, and then we will do really spend our time on the housing counseling plans for 2022. I'm not going to go through the entire list because it's a long one. We're going to cover a lot of things that we're thinking about and working on. Some of them projects only in the conception stage, and some of them that a lot of work is being done, and we want to bring you up to date on both of those. At the end, there'll be a Q&A, and there'll also be a break after the Congress and housing legislation piece, and then we'll do a quick plug on joining NHRC and talk about the next meeting we've got coming up with the Homeownership Council of America. Gabe Del Rio, you probably all remember him as one of the innovators in our field, and he's really got opportunities that can help the work of the housing counseling organizations. So worth knowing about, and that'll be in 2 weeks, the last Thursday of January. So with that, let's pivot to the start, and let's begin with welcoming Christy Villalobos Hauser. Christie's got a history of working in the Connecticut legislature. She's led voter turnout and elevation programs in Virginia. She's done a lot of very good work around women's rights and incarceration, kind of advocacy background, but also I think is a motivated person, and that's kind of what is critical in this work. She'll be our housing policy director, working in our work in the House and Senate, and it has been on the job at all of 2 days, and we're delighted to have her here. Christy, welcome.
Hi, I'm really delighted to be here with you all, and I'm really excited to get a lot of work done this year with everything going on. Thank you so much for letting me join.
Good. Yes. So yeah, and so there'll be we're already starting work on appropriations for 2022, and she's begun lining up meetings. We'll keep you informed of all of that, and you'll get to hear a lot more from Christy soon, as once she's had a chance to get her feet wet in all this. So with that, let's move on to the next thing, which is just an update on the community outreach work we're doing. This is really important for us in our ability to make housing counseling kind of front and center in the outreach, and the work we're doing really works with the local housing counseling groups. Ellie obviously leads that program in our work and has been a real innovation here. Ellie, what's the latest you want to tell us about?
Thanks, Bruce, and hi, everyone, and welcome to 2022. Happy New Year. So we have been working with Freedom Mortgage since the, kind of early fall of 2021. We've done 3 virtual outreach events with them so far. The first 2 that we did were in Southern California, and they were with housing counseling groups that helped Freedom Mortgage really kind of craft the letter and the email that they send out to their homeowners so that it was more attractive and a little easier for the homeowners to feel good about. They also helped Freedom Mortgage really design how they would conduct these virtual events. So we have ended up with virtual events that are really directed for homeowners to get some time with a housing counselor, and then also get some time with their advocate from Freedom Mortgage to talk about their mortgage. So these are going really well, and Freedom Mortgage feels really good about the events. They really wanted housing counseling to be involved because they understood that homeowners are nervous about talking with their servicer. They're afraid of what might happen. They don't want to lose their home. They're afraid they might make a mistake in what they say and in the documentation that they provide. So it's been very helpful to have housing counseling agencies front and center in the mailing that goes out and in the event itself. And they feel like it has been successful, even though, what we're ending up with is an average of 20 homeowners who actually come into the virtual event. But they're emailing and sending letters to between 1,500 and 2,500 of their homeowners in a given area. And they're seeing that between 90 and 95% on average, even if they don't come to the event, they've made some form of contact with Freedom Mortgage. And these are homeowners that had not previously been making contact, and they're, at least 30 days delinquent, or they're about to end their forbearance. So this has been very successful and useful, and we are going to be doing 9 events with them in the first quarter of 2022 in different states across the country. So you may be hearing from me asking for your assistance to be part of these events. So going forward, that's what we're doing, and again, this is really helpful for homeowners, and Freedom Mortgage is really excited about it.
Yeah, and it's part of our whole campaign to really figure out how to do outreach that incorporates housing counseling as the central component to reaching underserved communities. And we will continue doing this. Many of you participated in different versions of this. Thank you very much for that. And there'll be many opportunities coming forward. And as always, we're trying to share the lessons learned so that they're tools that you can use, but also that we continue to put events that will engage your organizations on this as well. And it's part of the broader work to try to figure out how to raise the visibility of housing counseling. So with that good note, let's go to plans for 2022. And I'm going to kick it off with developing a client tracking system. So this is one of the things that's completely new, and really what we're talking about is developing, it's a concept, it's not anything in place. We're going to need your help to figure this all out. But essentially what happened was that the National Fair Housing Alliance and Mortgage Bankers Association came to us saying, you know, we've done some events with you, we're pleased with them, but we don't know what the outcome for the client was. And that's a big problem, because if we can show the success of our work, then it's easier for them to be able to say, oh, let's keep doing these events and have housing counseling be central. If we can't, then it's possible the stuff might migrate away from us. And right now, sort of the state of the art technology is this concept that you work with housing counseling groups to reach these communities. So our plan is to try to develop a multi-system that would create, if somebody comes to an event or goes straight to a housing counseling agency, whatever it is, that they somehow, we have a way of tracking them, not just in your CRM, but in some system that would be uniform, that will be able to stay with the client. And maybe it's an app, maybe it's something else, it's kind of an open book, but the idea is they go to an event or however they come in, they get tied into this program. Whatever information we've collected on them that could be downloaded into your CRM with the client's permission. You do the excellent work you do. At the point where somebody's ready for being a home buyer, you will issue a certificate, and this is going to be a critical piece to this. It will match the data fields that would be in what we've been working on the Uniform Residential Loan Application and on the HUD form that is a normal thing like this, but it'll be a digital form that's tied specifically only to the client, can't be reproduced anywhere else. And when you send somebody over with the package, they also get, the lender gets the digital document, tells the lender that the housing counseling work is complete for this client, and so they're eligible for whatever benefits you get for being having been counseled. And then that's, and to be honest, one of the reasons we want to do this is we then have a way of documenting that the work got done and it's incontrovertible. It can't be the loan officer said, oh yeah, they went to counseling, I'm checking the box. That's not good enough. We want to make sure that's tied to HUD-approved housing counseling agencies doing the work. That way, billing is easier. It's clearer to the lender. There's a way of tracking all this, and it's information that would stay with the loan, and potentially if somebody becomes delinquent later, they could be referred back to your agency. And then also, tricky part of this is that you would get information back about whether they closed or not. And it is a challenge, I know, for some agencies. We don't always know who's closed and who hasn't. And especially if it's 6 or 9, 12 months later, you may have lost track of the client, and there will be, they don't end up showing in your performance numbers. So all of that gets captured in this process, and there's some way that this information flows. There's lots of privacy issues or technology issues that we need to figure out. But we're going to dive in the way we dive into things and try to figure it out. So if you've got some piece of this puzzle that you're already working on, and I know a few of you have been talking about it, let us know. But the whole key thing is that we create a systemic solution for everybody in the industry, big agency and small, that would be a useful piece of this. And it's digital certificate that happens. We're not sure if we sponsor it, HUD sponsor it, whoever the neutral party is that makes sure that this is something that's available. That's all to be determined. But we want your work to be recognized. We want to build it in, as you know, systematically into the process. So that's the thinking. Let us know if you've got some insights on all this. So let's move on, and we're going to talk about congressional work next. And we're going to talk about the HUD Housing Counseling Appropriations. Andy Buchek has been on our calls before. He's a long-term friend of the housing counseling world. He works for the Homeownership Preservation Foundation and Green Path, and he represents the Coalition of HUD Intermediaries in Congress. Andy's also comes from having worked in Congress, has deep relationships, has been part of the critical process for whenever we think about what our next steps are. Andy's one of the go-to people we want to spend some time with to figure out and make sure that we're coordinating. So Andy, welcome to the call, and tell us what it looks like for appropriations in fiscal 22 and 23.
Thanks, Bruce. I really appreciate that, and I've always enjoyed working with you and your team, and let's get started here. So where we are in the second quarter of fiscal year 2022, but still operating under a continuing resolution. And so I put together this slide briefly to show just the timeline of all of the various steps in the appropriations process. So you just have a sense of how it's been going. And I want to touch on a few of these. The first thing I'd say is that it is not unusual for Congress to be late in its appropriations, even though the fiscal year starts on October 1st. It is not uncommon for it to run late. Now, getting into late January, early February, beyond that, that starts to be a little less typical. For the HUD Counseling Assistance Program, which is the account in which I'm referring to, a few things. So President Biden released his budget last spring, again, because of the election and the new administration. That took place about 3 months or so later, probably closer to 4 months later than what is usual. And as a result, everything has slipped as well. But the good news is that after several years of the previous administration funding the program at $45 million in that area, or even worse at times, the Biden administration requested $85 million. It does include, that number does include a set aside for legal assistance, but it still raises the amount that would be dedicated for the grant program to over $60 million, which is an increase of several $1 million over the current levels. The entirety of the program right now is $57.5 million, and some of that money goes towards administrative costs and some of the other things. So the money that's available for grants is just a little bit above $50 million right now, I believe. And so the late budget request also pushed back the timeline for when the Congress took up its issues. We were really pleased to see that the House Appropriations Committee approved the program at $100 million, which matched what our request was. I think it's fair to say that we have really strong support in the House. Not only do we have strong support, but I think there are a number of members that really understand the importance of housing counseling and not only know its value, but are willing to sort of promote its value to other members. And so I think that speaks well to all the organizations that have spent time educating their members about the work they're doing and the results that they're getting. The Senate has been much slower in its process on appropriations, which is often the case. The Senate is, not to sort of make light of a situation, but the Senate is often much slower than the House in terms of moving legislation. So it's not uncommon or surprising that the appropriations process is similar. And the Senate sort of went through a much less formal process. And instead of doing the markups and things like that, where there's actually debate on the bill, right towards the end of the fiscal year, actually right after the start of the new fiscal year, the Senate finally released its bill text. And the reason it did that was that text, even though it hasn't been approved by anyone, serves as sort of the basis for where the negotiations would start between the House and the Senate. And what I think is most important to point out is that the Senate bill funded the program at approximately its current levels. And so we have a difference between what the president requested, what the House provided, and what the Senate provided. And that's roughly where we stand now, is that there still is a disagreement. And I wouldn't say necessarily disagreement. There are still competing versions of a bill that in a final number hasn't been settled on. So because the fiscal year started on October 1st, Congress was required to pass a continuing resolution, which just keeps the government funded at its current levels. We are currently operating under a second continuing resolution that funds the government into February. And so it's actually February 18th. I'm not sure why I put the third on here in this document, but it's actually February 18th. And what happened today, actually, this is probably the most newsworthy item, is that for the first time in quite a while, it might be the first time sort of since this process started, all four, meaning that the chairman and ranking member of the Appropriations Committee in the House and Senate, sat down today for about an hour-long meeting. And it seemed as though the sort of comments that they all made coming out of this was that they were cautiously optimistic that they could get an agreement. I think there's still some uncertainty as to whether that agreement and all the I's can be dotted and T's crossed by February 18th. But the good news is they said they agree to keep talking. They're going to keep working on it. And at this point in Congress, we will take that as a win, that they are continuing to keep talking about it and moving it forward. What we really don't want to see happen is for Congress to sort of abandon those talks and go into what would be a year-long continuing resolution, because that would freeze the program at $57 million, 57.5, and we'd have no chance for an increase there. And so moving forward, we have been talking with congressional offices. I know Bruce did some outreach just in the last couple of days with Senate offices about getting this level funding as close to that House number as we can. I think it is probably safe to say that it is unlikely that they would fund it at the full $100 million level, knowing of all of the demands on federal funds. However, I think it is reasonable to think that we can get that current funding level bumped up from its existing levels. And so why don't I stop there? I think I've probably gone over a little bit from where the time I was allotted, but I'm happy to answer any questions after we hear from Lou or whenever we get to the Q&A portion of this.
That sounds good. And we'll want you to ask you about what you think the action steps are for people, but let's go to Lou and then we'll jump in on that. So let's move on to the next slide. And so Lou Tisler has also been on our call under different hats that he's worn in the housing and housing counseling field. He's an old friend that we've worked with for many years, and he's the director of the National Naval Works Association, which is not Naval Works America. It's the trade group for the local chapters. Lou has deep relationships in the House and Senate and really represents a lot of affordable housing issues, not just housing counseling, but has really done a lot of the yeoman's work in reaching both Democratic and Republican key players in the field. And we wanted to get from Lou a sense of the kind of the climate and where things are going, things we should look out for in the House and Senate on the broader affordable housing field. And if it's got anything to add on approach, that's always welcome too. So Lou, thanks so much, and tell us, interested in what you have to say.
Oh, Bruce, thank you very much. I hope to live up to that. First, I want to say thank you to the housing counselors that are on the call, but also the ones who aren't able to make it. You guys do an incredible job, a yeoman's work down there in the field and making it happen. We're able to take your stories and go to the Hill and make this happen. So the things that you do every day may not seem very significant other than to those who you are helping, which is huge, but it also makes our jobs easier to advocate for more policy, more dollars, things along those lines. So please keep doing what you're doing. Don't get so discouraged on what's not happening in DC. because, you've got really good people, everybody on this panel and others who are trying to look out for your best interests. What's going to, and as Bruce said, I just want to make very clear, in case there's people from Naval Works America, I do not work for Naval Works America. We are separate organizations. We work well together, but as the trade association, I represent Naval Works organizations across the country, on the Hill, and to Naval Works America, but we're great partners. So what's happening on the Hill? Chaos. I usually put some words in there that my mom wouldn't appreciate in terms of what is happening on the Hill. But let's focus first. Andy did a great job on the appropriations. There's nothing worse than operating in working within three different fiscal years. The continuing resolution of this fiscal year, trying to get, or last fiscal year, trying to get this fiscal year that started October 1st going. And then we're about to hit the Hill, everybody, to talk about FY23. And so crazy, right? Just crazy. But just keep your eye on the ball, and the ball is trying to make people's lives better. So thinking of better, there's Buildback Better, right? And there are times where we're happy about it, and there's other times that we feel like it's not going to happen. In the current form, there's more money than has ever been allotted for affordable housing. We should be very thankful for that, right? We should at times be thankful for that, but it will not be enough. In the 3.5 trillion that was coming down, that might have been enough, but looking at what's there will be good, and it's the most, and relatively speaking, but it will not be enough. And we don't know if it's actually going to happen or not. It all depends on what is going on. So the president and the Democratic leaders are still committed to making this happen. There's been discussions that, if part of it happens, it's a down payment, but with what's probably going to happen in terms of the change of leadership coming up in the midterms, going back and getting partial payment is going to be very difficult. You've seen that Senator Manchin is in public opposition to Buildback Better. Some people would say, oh, it's one senator that's keeping this from going. I would say that it's every senator who's voting no on this is keeping it from going. So you could go and say each one of the senators who are voting no has a play in that. There's been some discussion that there's release of notes that from Senator Manchin's office that here's what he proposed and housing was out or housing was in or cut back. Don't get caught up in that kind of noise. Let's wait until we see what is coming down the pike. Make sure you continue to be engaged. It's very important that everybody in your organization is involved in advocacy. There are some organizations that say, we can't be involved in advocacy. We're a 501c3. Let's let Bruce and Lou and Andy and Marcia and Lot and everybody else do it. If you won't advocate for yourself, who will? And it's very important that you get out there and make that happen. So again, Senator Manchin is concerned with the spending, the immigration, the child tax credit, things along those lines. But there's other things that are involved in there too. And so there's probably some senators that are happy that Senator Manchin is in front of this and saying, I'm not going to support it because they don't want it to get to a vote. But sooner or later, it will get to a vote. And so there's the state and local tax, the SALT deduction that you've got the centrist and the progressive looking at and stuff along those lines. So, what will happen with Buildback Better? Senator Schumer, Leader Schumer has said that it's going to come to the floor to the vote to put people on record to make that happen. The question is, what will be on there and what can we get through to that? I think one of the things that, as we hope that Buildback Better gets passed, and let's say it does, if that happens before the appropriation process, I think that will change a lot of things that are happening at the appropriations process in terms of the urgency or the amount of funding, because people will take a look and say, oh, we put so much money in Buildback Better, let's look at the appropriation. That's kind of like my pessimistic self looking at it. Optimistically, as Andy had said, the Senate has come in at a lower number, not just for housing counseling, but for almost all the programs. And what usually happens is at conference, they rely on the House to move that number. And the Senate says, oh, we went to conference and we agreed to move that number. But the Senate generally has not come out recently with strong numbers that match the House. And so, we'll see how that goes. And then you also, and I tangent all over the place, so I have to apologize, but you still have the Senate parliamentarian that is going to be looking at a lot of this stuff to see if it can be passed for reconciliation. So we'll see about that. And for the rest of my time, Bruce, which I hope I have a little bit, you can raise your hand whenever I'm done, is really looking at leadership in what states, the change in leadership, not so much at the midterms, or perhaps then, but more looking at those who are moving on from their positions. And so we have Representative Price from North Carolina, incredible supporter of all things affordable housing, decided not to run. I think that it's safe to say that Mike Quigley from Illinois will be succeeding Price for that. Now, everything I say is my own opinion. It's definitely not NeighborWorks America because I don't work for NeighborWorks America. But again, it's from me sitting at the basement of my house just outside of Cleveland, being warm at 41 degrees and wearing shorts and a suit coat, but you don't know that. For the House THUD, Congressman Diaz-Balart has been there. His term ends. The Republicans have term limits on that. So we'll see him move along. The question is who will replace him? There's been talk about Steve Womack from Arkansas, John Rutherford from Florida, others from California. We'll see how that works out. It's going to be really important because if there is a change from leadership, we're going to have to be close to the Republican leadership. Who will succeed Senator Leahy? I would say all the bets are on Senator Murray from Washington to be able to do that. So Washington moves into play in terms of being very important. To succeed Senator Shelby, Senator Collins from Maine has been posed to be able to do that. And then on THUD, who will follow Senator Collins? Possibly Boozman from Arkansas or Capito from West Virginia. At the end of the day, as we talked about this, I've mentioned Arkansas a couple of times. This puts Arkansas into play in not a really highly populated state, but perhaps very important in terms of what we're going to be doing. So at the end of the day, what this really means is that as DC continues to be disorganized and dysfunctional, everybody needs to do their part to make sure that people know what you're doing. Saving people from losing their homes means that they're able to continue to work and provide to the tax base. Works on both ends of the aisle. Just very, very important to continue to do what you do, not take a very partisan. Personally, your partisan politics can be whatever. Organizationally, we're going to need support from those who are somewhat realistic on both sides of the aisle. And that will really mean in terms of working with those, reaching out to their staff, making sure they're involved with your ribbon cuttings, your wins, groundbreakings, whatever, because they want to see it on the press release. If Buildback Better passes and the minority doesn't vote for it, just like ARPA, just like CARES, just like everything else, they're going to take credit for it. And they're going to say, hey, look at the money I'm bringing. They're not going to say that they voted against it, but they'll say, look at the money that we're bringing. So bring them along, move them from proponents to neutral, or opponents to neutral, those who are neutral to proponents, and those who are proponents to ambassadors. And with that, you'll make our jobs easier. DC will continue to be dysfunctional, and we'll see what happens. Thanks, Bruce.
Yeah, good argument for dysfunction there, right? Well, thank you both. And part of the bottom line here is the importance of you working with your House and Senate members, and important to do two things. One is House members, even if you aren't in their district specifically, if you're serving people in that district, they're your constituency. Those are critical, and please, any interactions you've got that are positive, please send them to Christy, CC me as well. I'm always interested, but Christy's is really the person who's going to be shepherding all this. We're very interested in somebody who might be a champion on housing counseling. Looks like we're going to need some new champions in the coming rounds. But even just mild support is very helpful to know, and even dramatic opposition, let us know why they're opposed. Maybe there's some information we can provide, maybe there's something else we can do. Christy will be organizing meetings where we'll bring in people from their local districts, which of course are you. And so when you get emails from Christy saying, we've got a meeting coming up with Senator so-and-so, can you participate? Your answer should be, hell yes, with bells on. I'm coming, I'm bringing others. We're going to talk about what we're seeing in the field and why housing counseling is important. With that, let me just turn to Andy for a second. And so in the current moment on approps, what do you think we should be telling people in the field? We've got 192 of the more sophisticated housing counselors on this list right now. What should they be thinking about what they're going to do?
Well, thanks, Bruce. I think it is always important to share information with your elected officials about what you're doing, about what you're seeing, about what you're hearing from their constituents about their housing challenges. A lot of times, those offices hear about things very much after the fact, and the fact that you are on the front lines mean that you start to see trends and hear stories that are affecting people all around the country, but in their district. Anytime you have a chance to communicate with your elected officials in any level of detail about what's happening in their district or in their state, they are not only open and receptive to that, but sort of really want that type of information. They get inundated with information all the time about what's going on nationally or those types of things. But whenever they can get information about what is happening within their own area, their own district or state, it's even more valuable to them. And I don't think there are many people that would have a better understanding of the housing challenges that people are facing than all of you on this call who talk with homeowners every day about those challenges and help them try to figure out what the best solution and what their options are. And so in terms of timing of things, I had mentioned February 18th. Between now and then, Congress is going to be sort of working out differences and trying to resolve sort of that final funding level between what was in the House bill and what was in the Senate bill. And if there is any possibility for you to weigh in with those officials, I would prioritize the Senate over the House, but there is never a downside to communicating with any of them. That about what you're doing, about the need for resources, and about how you strongly urge them to fund the program, the HUD Counseling Assistance Program, at the level of $100 million that was included by the House. That's the simple message, and that's how I would convey it as much and as often and frequently as possible to those folks.
Absolutely. So perfect there. And then on Buildback Better. So as you know, we've done a lot of work on it and shaping the bill and trying to help move it forward. Many others have as well. And it's been this huge coalition. The National Low Income Housing Coalition has done amazing work as well, but many, many groups have done really good work there. So one of the things we did was to do a letter last September. We had 140 groups sign on. About 80 of them were housing counseling agencies, but we also had national players like the realtors and the Housing Policy Council. And we've reopened that letter. And we don't know when we're actually going to use it. We're actually relying on our allies. We're talking to House Financial Services and the Senate Banking Committee next week. We don't know when we'll actually, when the deadline is here, because we want to use it when it's most useful. But we've reopened that letter. I'm pretty sure Ebony or I put it out this morning on the leaders list, and we'll put it up again early next week. So look to see, you can see who has signed it already, but if you haven't, please do that. Feel free to circulate it as well. That's one small tool. And so when you're talking with a local office, bring up Buildback Better. If you're talking to Democrats, you want to say thank you. And we really appreciate the support. And anything you can do to communicate to leadership and especially to Senator Manchin, and I would say Cinema as well, that about support to try to get this across the finish line would be great. Lots of very important things there. Lou, do you have anything else to quickly add? We're going to shift to questions here.
Sure. I would just,
action items.
I just would like to add to Andy that, it's really important to be the subject matter expert for those on the Hill. We ask them for a lot of stuff. We ask them for money. We ask them for policy. But when you can say, and how can I help you? How can I be the subject matter expert? That's going to be huge. There are some housing staff that have been there forever, right? And they know housing inside and out, and they could probably tell you, whatever. But there's some that you're going to meet that last week they were the social media person. And they need somebody to go to be the subject matter expert. And that should be you. And so there are times where, you have the opportunity to speak to those on the Hill, and you should take that. And, there are times that there's not going to be an ask, and to make sure you do that. And staff move all the time. So the staffer might be in an office that, wow, that person doesn't support affordable housing at all. Why am I talking to them? Because sooner or later, that person's probably going to move. And they could be in another office that could be much more helpful. And so always treat those staff with the utmost respect, but build those relationships because they're going to move around and they're going to be beneficial to where they're at.
Totally right. And I just had one more thing, which is the other card that you should be playing. If this is not an option, you should always say this. If you're servicing their district, you should say, and if you have people who are calling you about trying to buy a house or are in forbearance and try to move out, we can help. That's what we're there for. And to give them the contact information, that's what we do. We just put together a list for Chairwoman Maxine Waters' office of the Housing Counseling Agency. She has been one of our biggest champions, and we're having to give her a list. So this isn't like a done deal, but many of you know the work we did with Charlie Dent, and that was all based on a relationship with the Lehigh Action Council and Ellen Jennings, who was the place that Charlie would send his deals, the predatory lending loans to help get them untangled. So lots of opportunity here. I'm going to stop for a moment if we have time for a quick question, and it's okay if we don't because we're a little bit behind schedule. Ebony, do we have anything in the queue we really have to ask?
No, nothing at this time.
Okay, great.
Just, hey, Bruce, 20 seconds, because I did see one question pop up about timing of the impact of delays on timing for grants. And the short answer is yes. If it lingers much past where we are now, then it starts to pose problems. But at the same time, your point is well taken. HUD typically gets that money out sort of late in the fiscal year. And so if we are able to get this resolved by February 18th or shortly thereafter, they should certainly still have enough time to get that money out before the end of the fiscal year, which probably keeps in line with where they have most regularly gotten the money out. Two things, last thing, nothing prevents them from issuing the NOFA sooner rather than later. They just would not be able to make awards. So if this lingers much further, you could see a potential for them to publish the NOFA with a little disclaimer that says they don't know how much money they have to spend yet, and they won't make final awards until Congress appropriates them their annual funding. But that also is a tool that they can use to help stay on schedule for making funding awards.
I'm so glad you brought that up. And we are hearing from the Office of Housing Counseling that they have created some efficiencies to try to move this more quickly. One of the challenges we have is there are no associate secretaries in HUD right now because they're bottled up in the Senate nominations, but hopefully some of that will get resolved sooner rather than later. Excellent. So let's move on. And one of our favorite voices in the housing counseling field, a leading voice, is Marcia Griffin. She's been on our calls before. Home for USA. She's the founder and CEO, but she's also an incredible voice for elevating Black home ownership and opportunity and financial capability and capacity, and also done brilliant work on bringing young people through HBCUs through into the employment in the financial services world. I mean, it's just been a huge innovative source, has some genius on the marketing side that all of us have benefited from. And Marcia really wanted to talk to us about a missing piece in the work we're doing and an opportunity that we need to really be thinking about. Welcome, Marcia. Always glad to have you here.
Thank you, Bruce, and I appreciate all of you and all of the work that everyone is doing. I hope my internet will hold up here. Before I begin, I just can't say enough for the work that Andy and Lou and you, Bruce, and everyone's doing on the Hill. It takes a lot of patience to do that work, and we appreciate it. Two areas actually that are of significance to our industry and certainly to me moving forward. And these are two areas that are that create insidious problems for the communities that we serve, and we can be the solution. One is the denials that we see every day. Once we get folks ready, there are just too many people, Black and brown people in particular, who are denied for these mortgages. And these are just some examples here. When you look at the denials and the fallout, I mean, nobody gets paid. The families are hurt. This is impacting the wealth gap. And this is an area that we fit in perfectly. We can be the cure for limiting, at least limiting, if not eliminating, but limiting the denials. And we really need to get the word out. We have to be more of an active voice, if you will, with our lending partners in the industry, etc. It's amazing how few people, other than the compliance people, actually see these numbers. So this is one that I pulled up for US Bank. Now you see the difference between white and Black and even Hispanic originations, but then you've got denials and fallouts. Fallouts could be for a multitude of reasons. People get disgusted, they get ready, the service is not good. I'm told by a lot of lenders that inspections cause a lot of the denials and the fallout in particular. This isn't illegal because families are hurt when they get their hopes and dreams ready to buy a house. So many people in the industry, they are looking at ways to tell Bruce he was denied. We turn this thing around to so that Bruce and others and all of the people that we're working with don't get denied. So this is a role that I think we can play, no question. We need to be more active. I think there's another slide there, Ellie. We can show you. That's obviously US Bank National. I don't know if here's just Fifth Third. 8,000, this is 2020, by the way. The 2021 HMDA numbers will come out later on this year, but you see with Black and brown, certainly Black and Hispanic communities, there is a far reduced number of originations, you've got denials, and then look at the fallouts. I mean, this is ridiculous. Something needs to be, we need to take a look. We really need to take a look at these numbers and work more carefully with some of our lending partners. Do we have any more slides? Here, JP Morgan Chase, the biggest bank in the country. This is national. Look at the few African Americans that were originated. You've got the denials and the fallouts, 700. When you add the denials and the fallouts, I mean, these are huge numbers. Another one, please. Ellie, I don't know if we just have these. Okay, well, this one is just for the city of Baltimore. But this is sad. You know, in the city of Baltimore, you have 30 Black people in 2020 who got mortgages, 10 were denied, and 11. So that's 22 between the fallouts and the denies. You see how sad these numbers are. It's even worse for Hispanic communities in the city of Baltimore. At the end of the day, these denials and the fallouts, now we may not have an opportunity to do so much on the fallouts, but we need to take a look. These HMDA numbers are open. We need to look at this for every lender that we're working with and, you know, really help them to understand that we are a cure for making them look better, for ensuring that there are fewer denials, and we need to work with people to get them prepared. So this is an area that I think we need to focus on more this year. In addition to the denials, of course, is the outreach. Now, in the earlier slides, we can see, and Ellie, just go back for a minute to, well, even why don't we just start with Chase? There's an outreach issue. I mean, they're not reaching these communities. And we are also a catalyst for helping them to better the outreach, to better touch these communities and get folks prepared and ready to be approved. So these are two important issues that I will be fighting for this year. I would love to work with more of you as we wrap our arms around these solutions. And Bruce, you know, I really appreciate all of the work that that your organization, NHRC, is doing to really highlight where we need to focus our attention and how we can really better work together on these issues that are significant to our communities.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And so let me just add a tiny bit to this. I think there's two opportunities here. This is always a really important, actually maybe there's three opportunities. So look at JP Morgan Chase, and somehow they could only figure out how to do 1,700 mortgages in 2020 to Black home buyers. There's probably some in multi-race as well, but you know, that's really a very small number in what the opportunity is. And so that's an opportunity for us to really be working well. The second thing is that, so I think Marcia is raising two sets of issues. So one is, what happens to people in the process? So do they get denied or do they fall out? In either case, if they're working with a housing counselor, you all are problem solvers. And to the extent that once somebody's made application, you continue working with the client. And as many of you know, I ran a large housing counseling network for years. It was that follow through, that relationship where you could problem solve. And somebody says, you know, I had a bad inspection. You then can step in and say, all right, so let's go back to the seller and say, you need these discounts because because you have a bad sewer line or whatever. And you could do the negotiation. In the same way, a number of organizations, I know a lot has done some work in this area around denials, is if they're denying people, can they do a warm transfer to the Housing Counseling Agency? So both those really represent big opportunities for us. And with the denials, it may be that some cases, well, oh my goodness, look, they shouldn't have gone in the first place. They had credit problems. We can work those credit problems out. It's going to take a little while. Some of it is they didn't figure out the income properly. There wasn't quite the documentation. We weren't really representing the family appropriately. All those things are things that we can help fix. And in a world where we really have a deep need for increasing Black homeownership and Hispanic homeownership to address this gap, this is a really important section here. And I really appreciate Marcia bringing some light on this. The other advantage to Marcia bringing this up is, you know, that every bank is going to hear about their performance, and that helps a lot. So thanks a lot. Let's continue talking about this, and let's hope some mechanisms to help build this going.
Great.
Cool. Okay, so next, let's move on to a couple areas that we're doing lots of great work in. And David Young, who's a regular on our calls these days, has been a strong innovator. He's the head of our technology committee, and all the work we're trying to do to mainstream housing counseling into the technologies that the MBA and Fannie and Freddie and the industries use. But he's also been deeply involved in the career path work that we're doing. And so we thought we'd give him a twofer and let him bring up both sets of issues here. So with that note, David, welcome, and tell us what's the latest on both issues.
Sure, Bruce. Thank you for the invitation to speak this afternoon, and Happy New Year to everyone. It's great to be with you. I think that, based on what some of the other speakers have said, is that 2022 is going to be a big year for the housing counseling industry, and technology and the career path are going to be a big part of a big 2022 for us. So I'd like to just briefly give you an update regarding technology, and also the career path and what we're doing to expand opportunities for people to join our network and become certified housing counselors. So I'll start with technology. Many of you are aware that we've been working on something that we call data standardization. And basically the idea behind data standardization is to develop a common set of data points that go beyond what are in the HUD 9902 form that we can all use regardless of organization, regardless of client management system, to better show our impacts and outcomes. So as Lou talked about earlier, the more information that we are able to show about our impacts and our outcomes, the better it is for Lou and Andy and others who are looking to secure more resources for us to do this important work. So 5 years ago, NHRC brought up the idea of creating a data standard for the housing counseling industry and set up a working group. And we've been working steadily since then in order to create this. We've created two data sets. Data set one is focused on data points that are in a system called MISMO, which is the Mortgage Industry Standards Maintenance Organization. And MISMO basically is a language. It's a language that is spoken by machines that help the financial services industry. So whether you're doing originations or servicing or something else, it is a common language that makes it easier for all of these different systems to speak to each other. So because we are part of the financial services industry, it made sense for us to also use this language. But there are many things that are in MISMO that are relevant to us, and that's what data set 1.0 focuses on. But there are a number of things that are important to us, things that we want to capture in terms of data points that are not currently in MISMO. And that is our focus for data set 2.0. So just as an example of something that's important to our housing counseling industry that isn't necessarily found in MISMO right now is a zip code. What is the zip code of a person where they started? And then if they go on to purchase a house, what is the zip code of where they purchased? So that type of information is not something that we capture in the 9902. It's not something that we currently capture via MISMO, but we are looking to include that data point in MISMO because it's an important resource to show what we're doing and those impacts and outcomes. So as I said, data set 2.0 is going to focus on data points that are important to our industry, but are not currently found in MISMO. And we have a number of data points that we've collected, and we're going to be working this year to round all of those up and get those ready to go. Phase 3 of our data standardization work is really going to focus on integrating all of our data points into MISMO. So we'll be working on preparing the business case and then submitting our data set to MISMO so that we can move through their change management process and integrate all of our data points into MISMO. And then from there, we'll be doing two major things. One, we will be taking our working group and transforming it into a community of practice within MISMO. And what that community of practice will do is maintain that data set for us. And if there are any additional data sets that needed to be added, any conversations with other folks that need to use the housing counseling data set, that will all move through the community of practice. And it will also make it a lot easier for us to have conversations with our other partners like originators and servicers to make sure that we are better able to facilitate communication across all of these various platforms. So think about this. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you had someone that was experiencing a payment issue and their servicer were able to contact you directly via the system and say, can you provide assistance to this consumer? Or if, as Bruce talked about a few moments ago, if someone applied for a mortgage and were denied, but then you could get that file and you could work with that consumer and then send that file back to the originator, doing all of those things electronically. This is where we're going. This is what the data standard will allow us to do. The other important thing is that all of our client management systems, so whatever system you're using, we're going to be asking our client management system developers to align themselves with this MISMO data standard, because it'll make it a lot easier for us to collect information, a lot easier to share information, and to show the impacts and outcomes of our work. So you'll be hearing more about the technology and the data standard as we move through. But with August of 2022 being 5 years since we started this process, we're going to be very excited to formally move our data standardization effort through the change management process with MISMO and have our housing counseling data standard rest within the MISMO housing reference model. So now I'm going to pivot over.
So David, can I just quickly add to that? I think this is just excellent work, and I know it's deeply in the weeds. It's our future, and thanks to David and his team for really showing lots of leadership here. I'd add a couple technology things that are opportunities here. One is that we're reviving the push to get the data standard, the data fields for housing counseling that we wanted to get included in the IRLA and the Uniform Residential Loan Application. And many of you probably remember we had it in, there's a change in administration. And even though there was an approved form, the new administration took it out. There's a push by both inside both FHFA and HUD, and of course from us, that and hopefully others, that we get those standards made mandatory. So maybe it's not going to be in the IRLA, maybe it'll be a separate form, but if we can get HUD and Fannie and Freddie to require this, that's major segments of the industry, and we'll start building us into the uniform rules of the game, and allow the kinds of things that David talked about, and tracking, and maybe we can get some pricing concessions from investors, all kinds of things like that. We'll also want language preference to be part of that. And the other piece is what I mentioned earlier about this certification when somebody completes home buyer counseling, that could be integrated into this kind of technology world as well. So let's move on to careers in housing counseling.
Sure. Thanks, Bruce. Just to piggyback on what Bruce said, this where we are with technology, we are at a jumping off point where there are going to be so many incredible things that we as an industry are going to be able to do, so much information that we can collect, and it's going to provide so much more benefit to our consumers. So I'm very excited that we've been able to do this, and extremely excited about all the things that are going to come out of this in the future. So please stay tuned. And I will pivot to the career path. So
David,
yes.
hi, before you do that, I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Someone wants to know how many data points will be added.
So we're expecting to add probably anywhere between 30 to 50 data points to MISMO. But the one thing that I would make sure that people understand is that this data standard is not something that we develop, say it's done, and then we put it up on a shelf. The data standard is a living, breathing thing. And so even if we add, say, 30 data points this year, and we realize in the next couple of years there are other things that we want to know, then we add additional data points to the MISMO reference model. We know from the work that we do, some of the things that we might have been interested in even 5 years ago, things are different now, and there will be different things that we want to know 5 years from now. And that's where the community of practice becomes so important, because we will move all of these additions, all of these changes through that community of practice, so that this data standard changes as we change, it grows as we grow.
Thank you for that. One last question. What will be the cost?
What will be the cost of the data standard? There is no cost in terms of creating the data standard. There's no cost to the industry. Where most organizations are using a client management system that they have a subscription for. And so what you will see through your client management system are some additional fields that you will be able to put information in, which will give you a better picture of your impacts and outcomes. But in terms of a direct cost to you, there will not be a direct cost beyond what your subscription for your client management system costs you.
All right, thank you, David. I have no further questions at this time.
Okay, so I'll move on to the career path. So as we have gone through the process of certification and have had most of our veteran housing counselors take and pass the certification exam, but we really needed to create a strategy for bringing new people into our industry, people that are interested in becoming housing counselors, and how do we do that? And where do those people come from? Are we recruiting students? Are we recruiting former clients? Are we recruiting people who have recently retired and are interested in a second or a third career? Well, honestly, it's all of them. So what we've been doing at Housing Action Illinois is working on creating a specific career path that we can then market and outreach to all of those individuals to bring them into the housing counseling space. So we have actually kicked off our first career path training this week. It started this past Tuesday. And we have actually had over 60 people register for this class, representing over 20 states. 72% of the registrants are employed full or part-time, 11% are students, 10% are currently unemployed. 60% of the registrants for this class are sponsored by a HUD-approved organization. And so far we've had, I said we've had 60 people that registered, but we had 42 people that actually attended the first training and have continued to go through this. So the focus of this career path is on helping individuals that are interested in becoming housing counselors to take and pass the certification exam. We found during the certification process that for a number of newer counselors, it was easier for them to pass the exam based on taking one of the certification classes that were offered by Housing Action and other organizations. So we are focusing on helping individuals that are interested in becoming housing counselors to pass the certification exam. And then once they pass the certification exam, they can upload their resume to NHRC's new website where they can be matched with organizations that are looking for people that have passed the certification exam. So once that individual has passed the exam, uploaded their resume, and is hired by a HUD-approved agency, they can then go on to learn the important skills on the job that will help them to become housing counselors. But again, what was most important for this career path was to help individuals to prepare for, take, and pass the certification exam so that they could then be in a position to be hired and like go through an apprenticeship so that they could become fully fledged housing counselors. So we've done this. We've begun
production and
we are marketing to schools. We are marketing through workforce development. HUD understands, the Office of Housing Counseling understands the importance of the career path and has changed their rules regarding scholarships for housing counselors. In the past, you could only provide training scholarships for existing housing counselors, but now HUD is allowing for training scholarships to be provided to individuals that are interested in becoming a housing counselor, as long as they are sponsored by a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. So it offers a really good opportunity to create that connection between a potential counselor and a HUD-approved agency. And it also offers a great opportunity to go back through the many individuals that we have counseled in the past to see if any of those folks might be good housing counseling candidates. So there are some great opportunities to do that. So with our career path, as I said, we launched the first inaugural cohort this week. And so that'll run this week and next week. And then we will be working with those individuals to help them take the exam and pass the exam and upload their resumes to the career website that NHRC has set up. And we will also be looking to schedule additional cohorts based on demand. We're expecting another one in April, as well as in September, and we will provide more information about that as we move forward. I also very quickly want to talk about something else that we've done in conjunction with the AmeriCorps program. So many of you might be familiar with AmeriCorps, which is the domestic version of the Peace Corps. And we call this the Housing Counselor Corps. And the idea behind the Housing Counselor Corps is to recruit an AmeriCorps volunteer to help a HUD-approved agency to build their housing counseling capacity. So through the indirect services that a housing counselor corps member can provide, it can help a housing counseling agency to expand their services. And then while that individual, that corps member is on staff, they can also participate in a career path training and take and pass the certification exam so that at the end of their 1-year term of service, that they're in a position to be hired by the HUD-approved agency that they've been working with or by another HUD-approved agency. So it's one more way that we can expand the pool of potential housing counselors by using the career path and by using the Housing Counselor Corps. And so I would just say in conclusion, if there are any other ideas that you have regarding how we can expand the pool of potential housing counselors, who we can reach out to, what we should be saying, is please let me know, let NHRC know. It is extremely important for our industry to increase the number of housing counselors just because of how many people we need to serve. Excuse me. And based on what Marcia just showed us, we've got so many people out there that need our help. And so we've got to increase our pool of housing counselors to be able to do that. And I'll stop there.
Excellent, David. Very important stuff. And we'll keep working on this. I saw a question come up about are the recruits from communities of color? And it's a resounding yes on this. And this is an area we're paying a lot of attention to. The housing counseling community is the providers are really a diverse group, and we really have to make sure that our hiring reflects that. And diversity is not just by race and ethnicity, it's also by age, by economic background, and for some of you following this, we've done a little bit of work to think about how people with disabilities might be able to participate as well. So, you know, these are all critical issues, and we hear you about why this is important. And there's always work to be done. The one other thing I would just add quickly is that more of you are recruiting than are using the jobs board, and it'd be helpful to get your jobs posted on this. The other big takeaway is that it is free to HUD-approved housing counseling agencies, and we're really trying to keep the board, the jobs board, just for housing counseling and for support things like administrative roles in the housing counseling world. So it's highly specialized, and we'll be doing a lot of thinking this spring about how to get people to come to the board who have never thought of housing counseling before, but as David has mentioned, also how to think about being as a career. I'll also just say that it looks like we might go past the half hour. We have an important conversation to have with Lot coming up, and I suspect there'll be some questions and answers after he does. So let's quickly pivot to Lott's presentation. We've talked a lot about lender fee-for-service payments. This is a problem we've had to solve. Lott with Unitas US, who's had a long career in affordable housing and in housing counseling work, is on our board and a leading voice. Will give us a really good overview of the various initiatives that are out there. Lott?
Thanks, Bruce. I hope you can hear me well. Thanks everyone for hanging in here. I know it's been slogging through a fairly long meeting, particularly virtually. I'm going to address a kind of an issue that builds on the data tracking issues that Bruce initially and David discussed later and just recently discussed, and also includes the Housing Counseling Agency and lender interactions or lack thereof that Marcia talked about. Both these topics are critical to the fee-for-service discussion we're going to have now. I know many of you are probably in some fee-for-service relationships, Bank of America being the one that's been out there most recently for a long time. I know Chase is starting to kick off a fee-for-service program. There may be others. What I'm going to talk about here is a more specific one that really kind of tries to incorporate some of the issues discussed earlier by Bruce, David, and Marcia. For those of you who have been in the industry long enough and have in the pre-purchase world before the crisis, fee-for-service was an active dialogue there. And at the end of the day, we were very active in it. And I have to say we had marginal success with the issue and have been much more, and this is in large part due to the foreclosure crisis and the benefit that lenders began to see when they included housing counselors in their work and their outcomes. That had shifted the industry perception about housing counseling agencies in large part. The difficulty now is in the pre-purchase world, they don't own the client, so they have a more restricted field to play in terms of how partnerships will happen. So there's that, plus a couple of years ago, CFPB passed a topic we've discussed before, no action letter, which essentially provides lenders safe harbor for partnerships they develop with housing counseling agencies that are consistent with HUD's general policy on lender HCA partnerships. And so it's the combination of lenders seeing benefit, CFPB finding a regulatory way to protect lenders against RESPA and other violations in the origination process has created a new environment where partnerships can happen. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to run through a specific initiative that Unitas US and other HUD intermediaries and counseling for organizations like NHRC have been working on to try to chip away at the systematic problems that fee-for-service has presented in the pre-purchase world. So anyways, you can go to the next slide. Or am I driving it? Yeah, there we go. Thanks. So what this is the Homeownership Partnership Integration Initiative is really a pilot that we're trying to bring lenders and counseling agents together in a business relationship, for lack of a better term, that would make fee-for-service a little bit more conducive and compensate agencies at a more acceptable market level, right? So there's and you think about the requirements that are focused for the pilot is standard of comprehensive services. In other words, banks from their side need to know kind of what to expect a client who's gone through a partnership has received. What are the services they've received? And so there is a kind of consistency from one agency in Arkansas to one agency in LA to one agency in New York, et cetera. We're trying to build some training elements to promote the standardization in the pilot. And lastly, which is just that there's going to be quite a bit of data collection and sharing of the data and evaluation of the data throughout is envisioned for the pilot. And just to be clear, this is not a funded project yet. It is out to market, and various lenders are looking at it right now. Our goal is really to test markets across, test different markets, so we don't have all high cost markets, not all. We have rural markets. We have a variety of markets where the home ownership cost of home ownership varies. So it's gonna be geographically diverse, and we hope to leverage the CFPB no action letter policy. In other words, we want to help lenders get through that policy, so the argument of regulatory blowback is kind of disappeared. So those are the three major things we're trying to do. Next slide. This is not to spend a lot of time here because it's what we envisioned in our original conceptualization. We don't know how many lenders would be interested in this, and so we were figuring we probably can get interest from 3 to 5. So we were going to test up to 5 markets with 3 to 5 lenders in each market to kind of go over some of the issues I talked about in the previous slide. And then we also envisioned that the participation with lenders would be a two-way street. In addition to the traditional participating counseling agencies referring clients to lenders, we also imagined declines and not ready borrowers from the banks are seeing, and you saw Marcia's slide. You could maybe call out those clients who fell out as well, would be referred through a system back to a counseling agency to kind of pick up or kind of assess and mortgage readiness and to just problem solve to get the family ready to successfully get a mortgage loan. The interesting thing about this one, this is going to be really market specific. So there'll be, let's say, for instance, a St. Louis model. So there'll be St. Louis based lenders and St. Louis based housing counseling agencies who would be interacting in this particular view of the pilot. Next slide. So I know I blew through all the processing things, and that's just for the sake of time. But the one of the key elements from the lender side, but also from the counseling side, is what is the fee for the work, right? And this is based on a few things. What is the work? And then what is the cost for the work? So we did, the consortium that's working on this did a survey of its network agencies to kind of get assess of how much the cost is, right? The first stop was just to kind of break out the service, because it's, rather than one huge bag of services, there's certain stages of the process that are critical, particularly to the lenders, right? So the basic counseling, which I'll say our HUD housing counseling, pre-purchase counseling, is kind of tier 1. I mean, we are required by HUD to do much of this work. And so that's our first tier. The second tier is assistance with a mortgage application once a borrower has selected a particular lender. And in the case of the pilot, it'd be one of the 3 to 5 lenders working in the pilot cities. The assumption is it's going to be a very high quality product. So, the idea, we won't get any subprime lending in this pilot, but the idea is that once the application is made, the counselor would also support the borrower through the underwriting. And then finally support the borrower through closing. So the issue is that we were thinking, and we kind of delineated activities in each of these tiers, and we asked agencies to price this, and both in time and dollars. And what you see the bottom slides are really, there was a lot of variability depending on their mode of counseling, duration for various elements in the tiers. And so, but when we kind of put it down together, it was an average of 12 hours per client and an average cost, and the cost included not just counselor time, but kind of CMS, credit report, they kind of all costs. It was around $1,480. We had another, NFCC provided some pricing data too that helped inform this process too. But this is just to tell you that this is how we got started the process of, okay, if we're going to recommend a fee to a partnership, a pilot like this, how could we come to that cost? And this is just a summary of that process. Next slide. And so what we proposed, and we actually proposed it to a few lenders already. And so what we are proposing to them is $1,000 fee for a borrower who closes that, in which a HCA delivered that. It's an HCA client going directly to the lender. We also a second pricing of $800 for a family who was referred by a lender and were referred back to that lender for closing. The idea of the difference in pricing was really a difference in, a referred client to you. At least we've seen a couple of pilots where referrals like this have been made. The fact that a family's gone through the process of applying for a mortgage and been denied, there's been a fair amount of effort. They tend to be the higher functioning client generally because they wouldn't approach it. And therefore the time and duration of counseling tends to be a little less. And then the second point is the bank is spending marketing dollars to capture that client all the time. So it's a way it was just a small offset for that, the distinction of the client being referred from a lender to an HCA. So it was a two-tiered pricing model. And it's a two-tiered payment model too. A portion be paid a pre-approval and then a success fee at the end with closing. So in other words, the pre-approval, the work that your counselor had done with a family, preparing them, and we deliver it to the lender, and they issue a pre-approval letter. The first stage of our work is done. For them to close them, there could be a lot of things that could interfere that are not the HCA's rule. So we thought it would be fair to pay, once they have issued their pre-approval letter, the first stage of payment would be done. The fee assumes the 3 stages would be available to the client, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, I briefly mentioned before. And as I mentioned before, we got 2 sources of pricing from the survey and from some information that NFCC had forwarded to us. This is kind of what the consortium working on this project, how they got to pricing for the pilot. Next slide. And then lastly, and then I'll conclude, is that the question is, what are we trying to learn that is kind of going to be hopefully replicable in a much broader sense within the financial services industry writ large? So what we're trying to do is does standardizing services in these partnerships have value, right? So that's one key important element. In other words, the variance of what one agency does with a lender and another agency does with a lender, if we kind of reduce that, does that make it easier for lenders to work with housing counseling agencies writ large? Is the work that we're doing together either reduce administrative work on the lender side that we can do through technology innovation, which we talked a lot about earlier, and or process improvement either through peer discussion, whether it's within counseling organizations or together with the lenders. And then finally, how the training is there a specific training element around this that would facilitate the whole process of lender HCA partnership in the pre-purchase world. And then lastly, and not least important by any means, data. There's going to be a fair amount of granular data collected through the pilots because we want to get really specific of what type of clients are being served, how far are they for mortgage ready when they come, how long do they take to get mortgage ready, is there a difference between markets, and are there variables that we can attribute to the variance, and can we assess the service impact, the difference, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 services impact the process? I mean, if we don't have tier 3, for instance, which is, kind of helping the family through the mortgage and closing process, if tier 3 is not provided, do they close less than one who's offered all 3 tiers? Those are we want to really be able to communicate that to both industry and to all of us in our world. And so that's the last thing. That's one of the our hope, and we in our minds, I think this is an 18-month project, just so you have a timeline for it. This is all to say that fee for service will continue in other formats, right? What we wanted to do is really tease out something that is really a little more tight and can generate some data that will teach us all something. And so this is what we came up with. And how long did this take? Honestly, it probably took a year, maybe a little more of really serious discussion about what that would look like. Because you can imagine all these choices. There was a lot of sifting through, models people provide, what is it? It was a hope to synthesize some of those things into communicable sound bites and a process that lenders will be able to understand. So that's that's what's in the market now. I don't have a success. We're hoping to launch something like this late spring, just judging from the conversations. But we'll know we'll obviously let folks know. We're hoping some of you, if we do launch it, many of you on the call will be participating. But nonetheless, we'll keep you informed on its progress, because the learning and the systems things implied by the model have some value to learn from and share with you all. I'll leave it at that, Bruce, and toss it back to you.
Perfect. Excellent. As always, Lou, I'm sorry, just do that. I think it's really great. And a lot of hard work has gone in here. Special shout out to HPN, who convened this initiative and brought a number of us in. There's a lot more to come on this, and we'll certainly keep people informed as you're going on. But under fee for services, we hope will be a solution to some of the financial challenges that groups have. And we're really trying to pay attention to how it works for local counseling agencies, big and small, so that both of them can thrive under this. I'm going to jump on very quickly on a couple things. We'll do Q&As. And as I said earlier, we're going to go a little bit over scheduled time, but really want to cover all this. So one issue that we've got is we're deeply aware of the good work you're doing, but we're not actually learning what your experience is in the field. And occasionally we've done surveys, and thank you for those that have jumped in, but we thought maybe we'll try the oral tradition a little bit. So, and especially since we're on Zoom, as you all are, I'm sure all of you are Zoom professionals now. The idea is we're going to do a housing counselor forum. And we're going to open up, we're going to do a session, and the first one we're going to do at the time of a leader's call, and we're going to let it be open to all of you, and we're going to ask critical questions. So are you seeing people who are in forbearance, who are running out of time and don't have good solutions? Are servicers not doing what they need to do, or is this all working smoothly and we don't need to worry about it? What's happening with the emergency rental assistance, and especially our people faced with evictions? What is going on the home buyer front? Is there enough down payment assistance? Are there things we need to know about this? What's happening with cash buyers? That certainly cash buyers was one of the things that you all elevated to us that we've been doing a lot of work on. In a lot of ways, it's hard to get the real what's happening right now data. And so the idea is that these will be highly informal. The first one we're just going to open it up to everybody, see where it goes. But the idea is you'll be able to hear from others and from your peers and build on it and tell us what you're seeing. We'll work with the model to figure out how to make it work, and maybe it's too big. Maybe we need to narrow it down in some way, but we'll figure all that out. But we know you're right on the front lines, and we need to figure out how to shape our policy agenda from what you're learning. I'm just going to quickly mention our next leaders call will be on the 27th. It'll be the Homeownership Council of America, Gabe Del Rio. He's been doing some very interesting work that really expands the toolbox of what counseling agencies can do, what their income sources could be. And we thought it was time to working on everything together. So you'll hear more about that on our list. And I'm going to do a quick reminder about, if you haven't signed on to the Buildback Better homeownership letter, please do that. We'll post it again early next week. And we posted it this morning. So with that, let's turn to Q&A and see what we've got. Ebony?
Thank you so much, Bruce. Can you mute your computer, please? All right, we do have a few questions. So I'm going to scroll back up. The first one is for David. How do you envision the ability to counsel remotely, including ability to counsel someone in a different region or state? Is this feasible or in the near future?
And I would say, there are some organizations that have already started to do that. For example, have Buzz Siemens Group, which focuses on HECM counseling, where even before the pandemic, they were doing most of their counseling remotely, so that so we know it's possible. And I expect to see more of that going forward. The technology is catching up with us. And there is also flexibility now in terms of rules from the Office of Housing Counseling that make this much more possible. So I think that we will continue to do it, and we will see an expansion of that. And I also do believe that that will help with employment opportunities, because even if you are in a small or a rural market, you could still work with a housing counselor that is based in another community. But that person is still able to provide services to your clients virtually. So, as I said, I think it opens up some really incredible opportunities for us.
Thank you so much for that, David. I do want to remind everyone, if you do have a question for any of our panelists, please utilize the Q&A box, not the chat box, so that we can see your questions. So next question is, can lenders be asked to refer denials back to the counseling agencies with whom the clients worked, or counseling agencies with whom the lenders work with?
I'll tackle that a little bit. I think the answer is yes, but there's the barriers to that were, one of them mentioned, the no action letter. The idea is how much sharing of information can happen. And so if that's described, that process is described in the no action letter partnership that's being proposed, that gives the lender the kind of authority to kind of proceed in some sense. But the second issue, which is equally important, is the privacy security of the data, the data itself. And that probably ends up being the bigger issue, right? So if you send private data, how will you send it, right? Email, unless it's completely secure, won't be acceptable to a lender. If you're doing it within secure data like environments like the one David is kind of talking about, or some CMSs have created where lenders can port in, and you can use a third-party environment to exchange information. But it's really that data security issue. And then secondly, is the data secure at the HCA itself, right? And so This is where technology and data security on your end becomes really critical. If you can prove to a lender that you can so your data is secure on your side with your systems, and you're using a secured channel to exchange private information, and you have a documented partnership that allows that to happen. Those are kind of the key elements, right? And so I think what's going to happen more, it's not going to be quite as much private data in these initial partnerships. It's going to be a referral either through a securely sent Excel sheet or something along those lines with just the contact information. Eventually, as the data processing, data communication gets more robust, then more data can be exchanged. But initially, in the initial stages, particularly for local agencies and local lenders, it's going to be around more than likely a secured Excel spreadsheet. I'm not sure if that answers your question. But.
Thank you so much, Lot. The next question is, when or where will the information on the classes be made available?
So I think those classes are what David Young is talking about.
Yes, so we will have information on the Housing Action Illinois website, as well as information on the NHRC website. And we also provide information through the Coalition of HUD Intermediaries. So keep looking out at the NHRC website, and we will be posting information there as well as on our website, which is housingactionil.org. Again, housingactionil.org.
Thank you, David. Next question. Under the model that Lot identified, how many clients would a counselor serve on a yearly and on a daily basis?
Really good question. And I'll answer that in this way. It depends on how your model is set up. So as you can imagine, a call center model is different from an in-person model, and how they structure their service to the client varies on that as well. But if you did our math, right, 12 hours per pre-purchase client on average, right? If the average that the survey presented 12 hours, and I haven't done this math because I hadn't really pondered this, but you figure 12 hours per pre-purchase client, you divide that in, working hours is 22,080, and that would be your maximum. Well, with actually no processing time. Well, in some ways, I guess the 12 hours includes the processing time, but that would be the maximum. So 12 divided by 2,080 for a full-time employee, that would kind of give you the maximum amount that a counselor, if the average in the survey is the accurate number.
Thank you, Lot. Last question I have is, for the fee-for-service pilot, is the idea that agencies will participate and contribute data in the 18-month data collection period and be paid according to those estimates?
We envision, what the discussion in the pilot has been, there would be a fairly moderate upfront grant for participating organizations to kind of encourage both the participation, defray some of the training costs, and the data entry inputs, which, by the way, I don't expect them to be too different. I mean, they're not going to be special fields necessarily. That would be what we'd be asking for is like, more, the dates and time accurate, would probably be a little bit more rigorous under this model. The lender's going to have to be adding fields, so it's really will help populate CMS fields that traditionally are left blank. But I don't know if there's going to be a heavy reporting activity beyond some custom reporting on CMSs. We haven't really talked through fully on that, but the idea is that some of the upfront grant would defray some of those initial costs to get started. And then hopefully the fee-for-service piece of the pilot will kind of add compensation to help defray kind of counseling and other costs, kind of that agencies participating would incur.
Thank you, Lot. Bruce, you want to take the last question?
Oh, yeah, thanks for that. So Peter Rosario asked, should we have report cards for banks to hold them accountable? If we're taking money from the banks, can we also create accountability? And I think this is through Marcia's presentation about some of the numbers we're seeing in terms of performance, both in low lending to Black and brown borrowers and the rejection rates and fallout rates. And a very good point. We're at NHRC, our view is that we're not going to do everything. We kind of want to fill in the gaps where things are being done that other groups aren't doing, and especially with an emphasis on housing counseling and affordable housing. So I think NCRC does a very good job about analyzing the HMDA data, and I think others have done lots of great work in local markets to analyze this, and the work of the California Reinvestment Coalition in California kind of jumps out also as a place where they're really working on accountability. So that, I mean, our particular strength, I think it's a very good point though, that we have, and Marcia certainly does this, and we have as well pointed out real gaps in individual meetings, but that's a big job to do this kind of reporting thing. And our view of the world is, let's focus on the things that we can do that play to our strengths and capacity. So rather have the groups that are really developed with expertise in that side of the fence to do that work. But point very well taken. I will hand it to you. So thanks everybody for your participation, and we still have a lot of people on the phone. Really appreciate that. So just a quick reminder, be sure to join NHRC in 2022 if you haven't already. And we've had a pretty good renewal rate last year, and let's keep that going. We will continue doing all the good work, and that's really why to join. There are a few benefits as well. And we'll continue all that going. And then our next meeting will be in 2 weeks with the Homeownership Council of America. So with that quick note, thanks everybody for hanging in there. Really appreciate this. certainly if you've got some more thoughts, shoot us an email. We are really loving that kind of communication. Okay, good work everybody. Looking forward to 2022 with you.